They won't tell you this. But when a woman decides to sleep with you, or not, it's rarely about what you think. It's not your looks, not your money, not even your charm. It's about power, control, and the perception of risk. Centuries ago, Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved." Today, that statement echoes silently in human intimacy, especially in the split-second, unconscious decisions that women make about who they allow into their most vulnerable space. And here's a disturbing truth. Women's sexual decisions are less about love and more about strategy. Not always consciously. But evolution doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about survival. And so, attraction has always been a weapon. The moment she meets you, her brain begins to scan you like a war machine. Is he a threat? Can he be manipulated? Will he submit or dominate? In that flash of calculation, the game begins. Not a game of hearts, a game of hierarchy. This video will take you inside that game, not through cliches, but through dark psychology, Machiavellian thought, and the raw, unsettling mechanisms of female decision-making that most men never see, until it's far too late. If you're ready to uncover the psychological chess game behind desire, betrayal, and female power, then like this video, subscribe to the Mr. X library, and share it with someone who's still living in the illusion. Let's begin the descent. You've been lied to. From movies to music to well-meaning advice columns, we're told that women want emotional connection, deep conversations, and someone who truly understands them. But let me ask you something. If that were completely true, why do so many women reject the man who listens, texts back instantly, and showers them with affection, only to fall headfirst for the one who remains distant, unpredictable, or even slightly dangerous? No. This isn't about some toxic dating trope. This is about psychological survival mechanisms buried deep within the female brain. Mechanisms that have been evolving for thousands of years. And they don't operate in the language of fairy tales. They operate in signals, instinct, threat detection. When a woman decides to sleep with someone, she isn't just picking a lover. She's making a biological assessment of power. Her brain, subconsciously, is asking, is this man dominant or submissive? Will he protect or betray? Does he lead the tribe or follow it? This isn't conscious. That's the dangerous part. She may not even know why she's turned off by one man and irresistibly pulled toward another. But the machinery behind her desire is always calculating. According to evolutionary psychologist Dr. David Buss, female sexual strategies evolved to maximize genetic quality while minimizing vulnerability. In simpler terms, she wants the strongest genes, but the safest environment. And that balance, it's a tightrope walk. If you're too safe, too agreeable, too emotionally available, too eager, you trip a very old alarm in her nervous system. It whispers, this man can be controlled. And control is boring. Worse, it signals weakness. On the other hand, if you're unpredictable, emotionally detached, even a little mysterious, you may awaken her fear circuits. But here's the twist. Fear can enhance arousal. The line between danger and desire is thin, and the female brain often doesn't just tolerate that tension. It's wired to be drawn to it. This is not about manipulation. It's about recognition. You've been taught to play the role of the good guy, to pour your heart out, to be endlessly available. But what you've missed is that female psychology was shaped in a world of predators, tribal hierarchies, and social survival. In that world, safety wasn't sexy. Power was. And so her body learned to respond to the man who doesn't need her, who has options, who controls his emotions, who can walk away without blinking. Machiavelli never studied modern dating, but he understood human behavior at its root. Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear. In the female mind, the same holds true, except her decisions are driven by who evokes the right balance of both. She may never say it out loud. In fact, she might deny it entirely. But at her psychological core, the choice to sleep with you has more to do with how you make her feel about herself than how she feels about you. You think she's choosing based on compatibility, shared interests, mutual respect. That's what she tells herself. That's what she might even tell you. But beneath the polished story, something ancient is making the real decisions. Fast, automatic, and far beyond the reach of reason. You see, the female brain doesn't fall in love with logic. It responds to signals, deep emotional signals rooted in biology, power, mystery, risk. And if you don't understand that, you'll keep losing to men who do. The most seductive part of the brain isn't the prefrontal cortex, it's the limbic system. That's the part responsible for emotion, instinct, and memory. And when it comes to desire, the limbic system speaks first, acts fast, and lets logic clean up the mess later. That's why she can sleep with a guy and the next morning say, "I don't know what came over me. It wasn't a mistake. It was chemistry. Study after study confirms it." When women are most fertile, right in the middle of their cycle, their attraction shifts. Suddenly they prefer deeper voices, sharper jawlines, and more dominant behavior. Not because they want to, but because biology is whispering, "This one has good genes," and her body listens. Now imagine a man who understands that, who knows how to signal strength without saying a word. He doesn't brag. He doesn't beg. He doesn't overinvest. Instead, he controls the frame. He controls his attention. He keeps her guessing. And that unpredictability, it's intoxicating. There's a psychological study that proves it. Women were asked to rate how attracted they were to men based on how much they thought those men liked them. The ones who said they weren't sure, they scored highest. Not the ones who knew he liked them, the ones who didn't know. Why? Because uncertainty is addictive. It stimulates dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. And suddenly, she's thinking about him all day, wondering, hoping, doubting, chasing. And the more her mind loops, the more emotionally invested she becomes. This is not love. It's not even lust. It's attachment to confusion. And it's one of the most powerful psychological forces in attraction. Meanwhile, the safe guy is texting good morning and asking how her day went. She's not cruel. She appreciates him. She might even say he's perfect. But inside, no spark, no fire, no confusion, just predictability. And here's the cruel twist. The female brain isn't wired to fall in love with what makes sense. It's wired to fall in love with what feels significant. Emotion, uncertainty, perceived strength. That's why Machiavellian men, the ones who are calculated, emotionally controlled, even a bit cold, often get chosen over the ones who genuinely care. It's not fair, but it's nature. And until you see this clearly, you'll keep wondering why she says one thing and chooses another. But the real nightmare begins when we dive into the dark triad. Traits like narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And discover just how strongly some women respond to them, especially during peak fertility. You think what I've said so far is dark? You haven't seen anything yet. There's something most men refuse to accept. Sometimes, the more dangerous a man feels, the more a woman's body responds. Not because she wants to be hurt, not because she lacks standards, but because biology and psychology aren't always interested in safety. They're interested in strength. And that's where the dark triad enters. You've heard of it. Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy. 3 personality traits that most people claim to hate, yet consistently show up in the beds of the most desired men. Let that sink in. These traits aren't randomly grouped together. They share one common thread: social manipulation, emotional coldness, and strategic control. And oddly enough, studies show that women, particularly during ovulation, are far more likely to be attracted to men who possess these traits. They don't say it out loud. They don't even realize it's happening, but their behavior tells the truth. One study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that women rated men with narcissistic traits as more attractive for short-term relationships, especially when those men were confident, dominant, and emotionally detached. It's not that women consciously want narcissists. It's that the presentation of narcissism, the grandiosity, the self-assurance, the refusal to chase, mimics high value. And in a world where men are conditioned to seek approval, the man who doesn't care becomes magnetic. Psychopathy takes it even further. Psychopaths, the real ones, not the cartoon villains, exhibit low emotional reactivity, high impulsivity, and intense charm. They know how to mirror people's desires, give just enough to hook them, and then disappear. To the logical mind, this should be repulsive, but to the unconscious brain, especially a brain tuned to novelty and intensity, it's irresistible. Because those traits hijack the limbic system. The danger feels like excitement. The emotional withdrawal feels like mystery, and the woman begins to chase her own pain, thinking it's passion. And what about Machiavellianism? That's the strategist, the long game. He's the one who doesn't just manipulate emotions. He builds a narrative around them. He doesn't yell. He calculates. He offers just enough validation to keep her hoping, while keeping her off balance. He becomes the center of her emotional storm without ever raising his voice. Now ask yourself, why are so many emotionally healthy women drawn to men who leave them broken? It's not weakness, it's programming. The dark triad traits mimic the emotional signature of power. And in the evolutionary brain, power equals protection, resources, and sexual fitness. The fact that those same traits also lead to toxic relationships, that comes later, when her brain sobers up. But during the high, she's addicted. Not to him, to the chemicals he triggers. This is why logical advice fails. Treat her well. Be consistent. Communicate. Great in theory. But if you don't create emotional intensity, none of that will matter. The brain doesn't fall for facts. It falls for feeling. And dark triad men understand that, even if unconsciously. This isn't a celebration of toxic masculinity. It's a warning. Because whether you use this knowledge to become more aware or more dangerous, the truth is, women's attraction isn't always noble, and neither is yours. And if this disturbs you, it should. Because next, we'll confront the most uncomfortable truth of all. She doesn't always choose the man who's best for her. She chooses the one who controls the frame of her reality. And by the time she realizes it, she's already in too deep. She says it was her choice. But was it? You see, when a woman decides to sleep with a man, the decision rarely happens in a moment. It begins long before the clothes come off, long before the kiss, the eye contact, even the conversation. It begins the moment he takes control of the frame. The frame is everything. It's not what you say. It's what your presence says about you. It's the invisible container of belief, value, and dominance that you bring into every room, every interaction, every silence. Most men give that power away without realizing it. They seek approval. They try to earn attention. They adapt to her mood. They wait for a sign, a green light, a permission. But the man who controls the frame never asks for permission. He defines the energy. He moves through space like he owns it. He doesn't need to convince, because he assumes his value. And that assumption creates psychological tension. She wonders why he's so calm, why he doesn't react, why she feels more vulnerable around him, even if he hasn't touched her. This is how the illusion of choice begins, because the more he defines the emotional reality between them, the more she adapts to it. Not consciously, biologically. You have to understand how the brain works in emotionally charged situations. When uncertainty enters the room, the brain seeks resolution. If he is emotionally ambiguous, present, but not overinvested, her brain starts scanning for meaning. Her imagination fills the gaps. And often, she begins to attach feelings that weren't there before. She's not falling for who he is. She's falling for the way he makes her feel about herself. And that feeling is shaped by how much of herself she has to offer up to earn his focus. This is why the illusion of choice is so powerful. She may feel like she's the one seducing, that she's choosing to lean in, that she's taking control. But the truth is, he created the conditions that made her want to choose. It's the same principle casinos use. Ever notice how there are no clocks, no windows, no clear sense of time? That's not accidental. That's framing. The environment is designed to make your brain lose track of control, so it starts reacting to stimulus rather than planning action. Now imagine a man who does that emotionally. He frames the space between them with just enough attention, just enough coldness, just enough intimacy and withdrawal to make her crave the high again. That's not seduction. That's psychological design. And here's the most disturbing part. She will rationalize every step of it. She'll say, "We just had chemistry. He made me feel seen. It just happened." But in reality, it didn't just happen. He engineered it. Not necessarily to hurt her, not even consciously. But when a man understands how to control perception, emotion, and presence, he no longer asks to be chosen. He becomes the only option she emotionally feels. And that is the illusion. Not that she didn't choose, but that the context in which she chose was already built for her. That's the real danger. Not the man who begs, not the man who brags, but the man who doesn't need to do either. He just creates the frame and lets her walk into it. Now ask yourself, how many choices in your own life felt like yours, but were actually someone else's frame? This is the invisible war behind desire. And in the final chapter, we'll ask the hardest question of all. If you know how to influence someone's emotions, should you? You've made it this far, and now the real question stares you in the face. If you could influence someone's emotions, not manipulate, not force, but subtly guide their attraction, their desire, their decisions, would you? Would you sleep easier knowing you understood the game? Or would it haunt you, knowing that most people never had a chance? Here's the truth. Nobody wants to admit. Machiavellian psychology works. Dark triad traits, when masked by charm and discipline, are terrifyingly effective. They bypass logic, overwhelm resistance, and leave the other person thinking, "It was my choice." But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. This is the line no dating coach, no red pill guru, no self-help podcast ever talks about. Because the game is addictive. Once you know how to take control of someone's attention, it's hard to unlearn it. It feels powerful, almost godlike. But power without awareness is just destruction on a delay. You can create emotional addiction. You can engineer intimacy. You can make someone obsess over you with just enough mystery, detachment, and illusion. And you can walk away untouched while they spiral. But every time you do that, something dies. Not just in them, in you. Because when you reduce connection to tactics, seduction to strategy, and love to leverage, you lose your own capacity to feel it. You become cold, empty, strategic, yes, but hollow. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. Not that women are manipulated, not that men become manipulators, but that in the pursuit of emotional control, you forget how to be emotionally real. That's the trap Machiavelli never warned you about. He taught how to win, he taught how to dominate, but he never taught how to connect, because he didn't believe in it. He believed in power, and everything else was decoration. So what do you do with all this knowledge? Do you use it to get more attention, more control, more intimacy without vulnerability? Or do you use it to protect yourself, Oshik, to spot manipulation, to navigate emotional warfare, to see behind the masks others wear? Because here's the final twist. Once you understand dark psychology, you don't just see others differently. You see yourself differently. You start questioning your motives. You start noticing when you're crafting your words to influence instead of express. You start realizing how much of your behavior was never really yours, but a pattern you learned to survive. And maybe, just maybe, that's where true power begins. Not in control, but in clarity. Because the most dangerous man isn't the one who manipulates others. It's the one who can see manipulation happening and chooses not to use it. That man is rare, because he's not just powerful, he's awake. And in a world obsessed with winning at all costs, being awake might be the last rebellion left. So if you're still here, watching, listening, thinking, ask yourself this one question. Would you rather be feared, desired, or understood? Because Machiavelli made his choice. Now it's time to make yours.